Warning, audiences everywhere are growing concerned about distasteful and gruesome films. This trailer depicts scenes that may offend sensitive viewers.
Hollywood, the city where dreams come true. Ever since we were little, media has been feeding us this Hollywood romanticization. If you work hard enough and you want something bad enough, eventually it will happen to you. Movies like La La Land show this. But is that really the case? I'm not here to say yes or no, I'm just here to tell you a true story about Peter Jackson's second feature-length film, Meet the Feebles. A New York Times critic said was destined to stand out as an unfortunate footnote in Mr. Jackson's career. A movie that Jackson himself described as very savage. And a movie that is now banned in Ireland. A movie that is so anti-Hollywood, not only in its subject matter, but actually how it was made. But to understand Jackson's second feature-length film, we first have to understand his first. His first movie was called Bad Taste, a movie he basically filmed in his backyard in New Zealand with little to no money with his friends on the weekends. It was originally supposed to be a 20-minute short that just got longer and longer and eventually got funding, and it ended up a feature-length movie that was shot over the span of 4 years because he could only film on the weekends. This movie established a tone for the next few of his movies to follow, but it also established Jackson himself as a director, that he's not afraid to do it with his own two hands and get in there, and that no movie is too big for him. And so that brings us to Meet the Feebles. I bet you're wondering what this movie is even about. Meet the Feebles is a parody of the Muppets. It's a bunch of animals putting on a variety show, and the night of the show everything goes wrong and hijinks ensues.
From Peter Jackson, the director who gave you Bad Taste, comes a movie with no taste at all. Meet the Feebles, the adult puppet movie with something to offend everyone.
But this isn't childlike slapstick you'd associate with children's media. This is Meet the Feebles, a dark, raunchy, extremely black comedy, where topics that are touched on include, but are not limited to, drug abuse, sex addiction, adultery, baby daddies, AIDS, Vietnam PTSD, drug deals, pornography, roofies with attempted rape, attempted suicide, and the whole thing ends with a mass public shooting. The plot itself probably deserves a whole video on its own, but for right now that's all you need to know, that it was extremely offensive and out there and dark and exactly what Peter Jackson wanted. Jackson wanted to capture a darker, grittier side of Hollywood that you don't always see in the movies, one that's more realistic. He captured a version of Hollywood where reporters are trying to smear your name through the mud at any chance they get, a version of Hollywood where you're not entirely sure if you impregnated that woman or not, a version of Hollywood where your boss abuses his power for sexual favors, and a version of Hollywood where you just have to do drugs to keep up to the day-to-day grind. To go with the dark themes of the movie, the visuals accompany it by just being nauseating with imagery of vomit and feces pretty much in every scene, and the look of the movie is just disgusting. It's easy to say that this movie is not conventional in the slightest. It is just downright offensive and crude and disgusting, and Peter Jackson makes an effort to make fun of literally anything he can in the darkest way possible. And that's exactly what he wanted, because he was just a small New Zealand filmmaker poking fun at the big guys. And that's the story I want to focus on. How a small New Zealand filmmaker made this unconventional movie in the most unconventional of ways. Meet the Feebles was originally supposed to be for TV, but Japanese investors wanted to make it a full-length movie. So Jackson and the rest of the writers scrambled to rewrite the script, filling it up so it was feature-length long. After the script was rewritten, Jackson got about 10 actors to record lines in a recording studio, each actor playing several characters each. Once all the lines were recorded, he started filming in an abandoned train shed in the middle of New Zealand somewhere. He basically turned this empty train lot into a full sound stage where he filmed all of the movie.
Making movies is really an ingenious process at the best of times for all departments, and I think that New Zealanders are probably ideally suited to it because we are very ingenious, and the fact that we're making a film like this and we're doing it in an old railway shed, it's freezing cold, hence the fact we're wearing coats.
As opposed to his first movie that took him 4 years to make, he only had 3 months to shoot this. This is a good time to mention I'm getting most of this information of a documentary called Sex, Drugs, and Soft Toys, which was a TV special that aired in New Zealand about the making of this movie. It's a very fascinating watch, and I'll link to it in the description, and I'll be showing some clips throughout while I'm talking about this, but I recommend you watch the full 30 minutes in its entirety because how this movie is made is just a feat in itself, and I'd recommend watching that. Filming with puppets is a lengthy process, but making them is probably lengthier.
Being forced to make that many characters quickly, you have to make some decisions pretty quickly, but also the pressure in terms of having to get all the puppets made on time with very little money has been pretty tough going too.
This movie went over budget and over schedule to the point where cast and crew members were pitching in some of their own money just to help film scenes. The production team applied for a $750,000 grant from the New Zealand Film Commission, which was ironically turned down by Jackson's future producer Jim Booth. Eventually, the commission ended up granting them $500,000. But as their deadline to finish the movie came closer, the commission got really scared that it wasn't going to be done in time, so they pulled their name from the credits. Now, I'm not sure if this is true because this just sounds so crazy, but according to the IMDb trivia of this movie, the production team couldn't get their hands on blanks for a specific type of gun they had, so they used real live rounds while shooting this movie. They used a live gun on set. And if you think this production couldn't get any weirder being filmed in the middle of a train lot in New Zealand, in freezing temperatures, going over budget, this movie was submitted to a film festival in Italy. And this is Danny Mulherin. He plays Heidi the Hippo in the movie, not only the voice actor, but he also wears the costume. Danny won Best Actress in that film festival for his role. A man in a hippo suit won Best Actress. You can't make this up. So, after the movie finished production, what happened? What were the results? Well, the film only made $80,000 in the box office since it had very limited release because movie theaters didn't really want to show a movie with a mass shooting at the end. That was so offensive and gross. So obviously it did not make its money back and it received harsh criticism from reviews. Critics now thought of Jackson as just a sloppy director who only relied on shock value for his movies. But of course, as we all know, this is not the end of Peter Jackson. He went on to make his third movie, Brain Dead, or known in North America as Dead Alive, which is just another gory zombie slasher movie. And his first 3 movies are now known as sort of an unofficial trilogy in Jackson's work of just out there, grotesque, dark humor. Jackson's movie Heavenly Creatures is what put him on the map and set him on a path towards more serious movies. And of course, that led him to, you guessed it, the Lord of the Rings movies. It's important to note that Meet the Feebles was the first movie that Jackson and his wife, Fran Walsh, worked together on, and they have been working together ever since, writing movies together and making movies together. And when they made Lord of the Rings Return of the King, the couple shared 2 Oscars. They shared the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay and they shared the Oscar for Best Picture that year. For the same movie, Fran won Best Original Song, and Jackson won the Oscar for Best Direction. Overall, Lord of the Rings Return of the King won 11 Oscars that year. Jackson even mentioned bad taste in Meet the Feebles in his acceptance speech.
A special thanks to Peter Nelson and Ken Cammons, who were with me right from the days of Bad Taste and Meet the Feebles, which were wisely overlooked by the Academy at that time.
He did leave a legacy, paving the way for media like Avenue Q, Team America, World Police, and Happy Time Murders to all exist. And now, years later, Meet the Feebles has sort of received a cult status now, and critics are finally acknowledging the technical skill it took to use all those puppets, and critics are even acknowledging the catchy songs. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, it's a musical. In conclusion, Peter Jackson wanted to show the world that small New Zealand filmmakers matter. Maybe he didn't get the immediate results he wanted, but years later he showed the world that if you want something bad enough, and if you work hard enough towards it, it will happen.
I think that there's a certain image of a New Zealand film, in the audiences in the public's mind in New Zealand and overseas, I guess to an extent, of being quite naturalistic types of movies, slices of life rather than slices of cake. And I hope that with Bad Taste and now with The Feebles that people can see that that we can make slices of cake in New Zealand just as well as they can overseas. We don't have the budgets to spend, but we can produce these types of movies too.